Greetings, everyone. Welcome to the LiftAffect podcast. I am your host, Matt McNeil, founder, clinical director, and director of human performance at LiftAffect, where we assist professional pilots with maintaining better mental health and optimizing their mental skills. The goal of this podcast is simple: to help pilots and other high liability professionals and disciplines come out of the shadows to discover how we can live better lives personally and professionally. Join us each episode as we discuss various topics ranging from mental health, mental skills and performance, to business, entrepreneurship, and a few other surprises along the way.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the LiftAffect. And if you put this in, I'm going to kill you. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the LiftAffect podcast. I'm your host, Karl Keller, along with the main man, Matt McNeil, as always.
It's a mouthful, isn't it?
Yeah, sometimes. This is our post-July 4th podcast. How was your 4th?
Well, they canceled the fireworks here because the weather. The one time that it was probably conducive for fireworks because everything's so wet and green, the weather was just too crappy, so they canceled all the fireworks. So it was okay. We hung out with the neighbors and lit off some legal fireworks of our own in the street, and the kids had a good time. So it was good. We ended up driving back from New Mexico during the day, so the day was just sort of spent on the road, but things are good. How was yours?
It was relatively quiet. We watched some fireworks, and we were at the house, and we're not that far away where we could see the fireworks from the county. And of course, our dog was our ferocious German Shepherd was cowering in fear with all the noise. But like one of her few things that she just doesn't cotton to.
Yeah.
But it was a quiet weekend. My daughter turned 18 yesterday, so just another adult down, 3 to go.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
But I know I can't believe how fast they're growing up. It's scary.
Yep.
It really is.
Yeah.
Yeah. You've got a few years to go before your first one.
Yes, I do. Absolutely.
But it'll come. Let me tell you. It will come.
I can't believe she's already 7, man. I'm like,
I know.
I just and I get these little memories show up on your phone. You know, I think it's the photo app or something pushes it, and it's like, oh my gosh, that was just like a couple of years ago, and now she's like, you know, it's like a person, like a little person.
At 7, she becomes a person. Before that,
she's got her own idea. Well, she's had her own idea since she came out.
Oh my God!
You know,
my 6-year-old thinks it's like, Dad, you really don't know what's going on.
No, don't know anything. Yeah, I'm like, my daughter never fails to remind me that I'm just so out of the loop.
Jurassic.
And I'm like, oh God, what's it gonna be like in high school? You know, maybe I'll go back to Fly the Line when she's in high school. I don't know, man.
I feel like a dinosaur. I'm just, thank God they aren't burning me for dinosaurs. Like the old oil thing.
Yeah.
But hey, you know what? I think we're gonna finish up a series today.
Okay.
A 3-parter, right?
Yep.
Boy, I don't think our listener really knew what they were getting themselves into when they asked our question on science.
Nope. No.
It's
it's one big experiment, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's science.
That's science, and that's and I think as you and I had talked about a little offline, it's like, why are we doing this? Well, look, the reality is the podcast. I'm in the podcast for the long haul, and I want to cover things that I think are interesting, and I think that I think some listeners will think is interesting as well, and maybe you won't find it very interesting, and you can skip those episodes, or just listen to what you want out of it. You don't have to love every second of it, but I think part of this is scratching our own itch, and I don't think that we're that different from a lot of other people, so that's kind of why we're delving into some of this stuff.
When we kind of answer the questions, we don't have any preconceived notion of where it's going to go. This one went down, I can't say a rabbit hole, but it became much more in depth, and it turned into, from a simple question to a 3-parter. So, and that will happen. we just never know where they're going to take us sometimes. But I know you were talking, the highlights, I think, were you were talking about bias, and you wanted to address a few more things there. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to kind of let you start with there. You had a few things you wanted to clean up and finish up on bias from last week. So I'm going to kind of lob it to you and let you finish that up.
Yeah, like to apply maybe bias to when we're looking at studies, which was the whole origin of this conversation, was how do you know what's good science versus bad science? And like whether you're reading a report in the USA Today or you're reading something in the New England Journal of Medicine, you still have to discriminate at some level. What does it say? Now, if there's something featured in a journal like the New England Journal of Medicine, you can assume that there's some level of rigor with a study being accepted into the journal, which is what the peer review process is. And you could argue that the New England Journal of Medicine is biased, but I think that at some respects, these types of publications there is an assumption, and again, you can challenge assumptions, but there's an assumption that these things are legitimate and that they've done their homework and that they're using the latest and greatest of human resource and of technological resource to determine whether something is viable or not. But one of the things that I wanted to talk about when you're thinking about bias, which is what we talked about last time, is so what kinds of studies are, like, where does bias appear when you're looking at studies? And I think that the studies that are most vulnerable to bias are observational studies. There's a huge potential for bias in observational studies. Observational studies are where there are no, there's not a control, there's not a experimental group, there's not where you have a randomized selection process. You have double blind where the participants are blind, the experimenter is blind to who's getting which treatment. So those things are designed to eliminate bias. Observational studies are, and again, I love observational studies. This doesn't mean, oh my God, they're terrible, you should never use observational studies. This is where you're just observing, you're looking at things and trying to infer information from those. And observational studies are very important. Oftentimes they're a impetus for greater studies or greater areas to investigate. But observational studies inherently have a potential for bias. So there's things to look for in an observational study that can increase or decrease your confidence in what the study is reporting. So first and foremost is the selection bias is a huge issue. The selection of subjects into a study or their likelihood of staying in the study leads to a result that is often not very representative of the target population. And so that's one thing to think about is like, okay, it's an observational study where they only looking at, so let's just say pilots and mortality rates after age 65. Let's just do that. Well, does this then apply? The problem with there's a selection bias with that study because, well, you only chose pilots. Does that then apply to the greater population? Well, there's probably factors that make that not very applicable. But even in this, well, let's say we did a study of airline pilots. It could not represent maybe a target population, which is, okay, well, airline pilots of what age? Airline pilots that live where? Airline pilots that work how many hours a month? Airline pilots that work what type of schedule? There's differences within that population. So you want to, there could be a selection bias in what that's, that study, that observational study inferred. There's healthy user bias, which is a form of selection bias where people who are health conscious are different from people who are not in many different ways. And this probably can't really be controlled without randomized controlled trials. So an observational study where it's there may be a healthy user bias, that's going to have some issues in terms of bias. so thinking about observational studies, prospective or retrospective, the healthy user bias is one of the more common ones that is seen in the epidemiology as it pertains to health. So one example that Peter Attia, who's a well-known, I guess he's a longevity physician, he just wrote a fantastic book called Outlive, by the way. He's got a great podcast if you're interested. I highly, highly recommend it. He talks about this. He uses an example of this where he talks about it like this. Okay, so is bacon bad for you? That was one of the big things that, there's always these studies each year that says like, bacon is the wonder food. Bacon's the worst thing in the world. I think bacon for vegetarians is the gateway drug to eating meat again. I can definitely say that from personal experience. But, but the question is bacon. He talks about, the question that comes up is bacon bad for you? So if you look at observational epidemiology, bacon is almost always bad for you. The hazard ratios are around 1.3, meaning it's got basically a 30% increase in the risk of basically anything you look at, whether it's cancer or, cardiovascular disease, which is heart disease, death, is that direct, it's that directionally. So the World Health Organization, for example, is looking at over 700 epidemiological studies for red meat consumption. And when you look at those, you have to ask, how are they measuring bacon consumption? They're using these food frequency questionnaires, which introduces recall bias. Like, do you really remember? People don't remember very well. And we've talked about that in V1. And it's like our ability to recollect is abysmal. I mean, it's terrible. But if you look at the bacon data or the red meat data on the surface, of course, you would be concerned if you looked at this. And the problem with these studies is that you can't ever, no matter how much you try to statistically reconcile it, you can't strip out the fact that people make choices not in isolation. So is there any difference between a person who makes a lifelong decision to eat meat and a person who doesn't? Well, of course there is. It's going to come down to many things that go beyond just their diet, including things that can't be controlled for, like lifestyle choices and how much they exercise and how do they take vitamins or not, these kinds of things. So you can control for some of these things. Like one thing Peter always talks about is like smoking. A person who doesn't eat meat is far less likely to smoke than a person who does. There's lots of studies that show that. Also, a person who doesn't eat meat is probably far more likely to exercise or pay attention to things like their sleep habits, or just be more compliant with their medication that does. People who don't eat meat are basically a proxy for someone who is quite concerned about health consciousness. That's a big driver for people that choose to not eat meat. Is they're like, well, yes, there's the ethical crowd, but it's also people that are like, you know what, it's for health reasons why I don't eat meat. Maybe there's family history of heart disease or bowel disease or something like that. So the point is that you've got, that is going to create some bias in the data. It's like you're kind of comparing apples to oranges, possibly, not apples to apples. So that's another thing.
Oh, I think I must be eating too much meat because obviously I don't have a good memory at times. I was just thinking, I don't have very many jobs as a host, but one of them is to set the stage of what's going on. And I'm going to step back for just a second and say, this is the third episode, and the whole, I didn't even bring up, for those that didn't listen to the first two, what was the whole question? And it really resolved around what's good science and what's bad
good
science.
what's
So
bad science.
I was a very bad host. No more red meat for me today.
Well,
so
that's and look, there's no judgment on whether you choose to eat meat or not. But somebody but you got to understand that there are lifestyle choices that may not be that are beneath the surface of observation that could impact the study.
I would even say, for those that do eat red meat, as an example, is it like, for instance, from beef? is it grass fed or is it,
Right.
with
It's got hormones in it, and
can have a huge impact. So there's no one size fits all clean answer, and that's what a lot of these studies are constantly looking at, is to see those effects with those controlled, experiments.
That's right. So that's a healthy user bias. Another bias I wanted to just touch on was information or recall bias. This is a bias where there's a distortion in the measure of association due to a lack of accurate measurement. So, for example, errors in accuracy or completeness of the recollections, which is called recalled, that's what recall bias is, regarding events in the past. Many people are completely surprised to learn how clunky nutritional, for example, we're talking about nutritional epidemiology, like how clunky nutritional epidemiology is. Food frequency questionnaires. We see these all the times in studies. They use food frequency questionnaires. So, for example, you get a call and it says, "Hey, do you remember how many times a week you ate an apple, or you drank a beer, or you ate oatmeal, or you ate meat for the past year?" Well, okay, some people pay a lot of attention to what they eat. I'm one of those people. I write almost everything down that I eat. I have for years, because I'm always trying to look at, is there a pattern if I'm gaining weight, or I'm losing weight, or I'm not sleeping well, or my exercise numbers and my heart rate variability goes to shit, or whatever. I'm like, okay, well, let me look back and see what I'm doing. But I'm crazy, right? That's not what most people do. Most people probably don't recall what they eat. Most people I talk to, when I even ask them about nutrition, because I'm thinking from a psychological perspective, they can't remember what they ate this morning, much less what they ate all year. So the number of foods that are encapsulated in the food frequency questionnaire is vastly different. It only covers a small portion of what people actually eat. And it's the food that I think the epidemiologists tend to look at, like red meat consumption, things like that people will underestimate when they do these validity studies and actually follow them. So that's kind of an informational recall bias, that observational studies they're prone to these kinds of errors, these kinds of biases. There's performance bias, which is also known as the Hawthorne effect. And this is a type of bias where individuals change aspects of their behavior when they know that they're being observed, I remember seeing these in when I was in undergrad and doing psychology experiments in the lab. And when people knew they were being observed versus when they didn't, that's always a threat to validity. People change. They change. So if you've tried to log what you eat every day, just by logging what you eat, you're going to probably change what you eat, becoming more mindful of it. So that Hawthorne effect, knowing that you're in a study, knowing that you're being observed, knowing that the data is going to be collected, does that then change the normal behavior? Well, we know that it can. And so then think about this. What would that do to the results of the study?
It would totally skew it.
It'd skew it. You don't know what people are in their natural environment. So,
yeah. It's the same like expectation bias. If they are anticipating what they think the direction of this experiment or trial is, they may steer it because they think that's what they're looking for. Yeah. As an example, that's just another thing where they're introducing something that's not of their normal daily or their normal pattern.
Yeah,
because they think this is what you're looking for.
Right. And I think a lot of this comes down to, and look, you can use this Hawthorne effect to your advantage. So I'm a firm believer that the people that you surround yourself with the most are going to have a huge influence in how you act and behave. So when you go to dinner with a bunch of people that are ultra endurance athletes, or people that are interested in longevity and they take care of themselves, right? Are you going to be more likely to order, the ice cream sundae for dessert and grab the big bread basket that comes out that when nobody else is eating it? The social pressure on that is you're probably going to be like, ooh, I kind of want to rise to the occasion here. I better try to eat a little healthy too here. Whereas if you go out to eat with people that are morbidly obese and everybody smokes cigarettes and drinks a 6-pack of beer every night, are you going to be more like, yeah, let me order a salad? No, you're going to be like, yeah, give me the burger with the the double burger with the fries and the milkshake and the whole thing on top of it. So this is the Hawthorne effect we could do a whole series on Hawthorne effect and where it plays out and how you can actually, if you understand it, you can use this to your advantage. What's your take on that, Karl? What do you think?
Oh, we've always talked about to look at, as far as who you surround yourself with in large effect will impact what you do. Could be your financial status, like you say, your health, even your emotional state. If you're around people that are very stable versus people that are very unstable, I'll just say it that way.
Mm-hmm.
But and I think we were talking about it one day, and it came to a little bit of a revelation, where he said, not only are the people that surround you impacting you, but don't forget you're impacting those that you surround yourself with. So it works both ways, where you have an impact on them, negative or positive. So most definitely, you don't want your kids to do drugs or be in a gang. Don't allow them to be near those things, right. or restrict it or mitigate.
Or don't be in one yourself.
Yeah, practice what you preach. If you're going to rail against smoking, it's kind of hard if you're doing the smoking, unless you're giving it a very good example of this is what happens when you smoke, emphysema and all these other things. Mm-hmm. But the key is don't start it, lead by example is the bottom line.
Yeah,
because otherwise, all their monkey see, monkey do. I remember that TV commercial where they it was a long time ago, where they had this little boy and the father, and whatever the father did, the little boy was trying to do. Mm-hmm. And at the very end, the dad lights up a cigarette, and the little boy's looking at, wanting to do the same thing. It was it was one of the very first anti-smoking commercials that came out, but it made it very clear you are a role model. Mm-hmm. And in this case, we're talking about a child, but even as an adults, people, like you say, are very susceptible, both consciously and subconsciously, to peer pressure or impressions of others. They don't want to look bad, and they want to please others. We are a species that wants to please, mm-hmm. by and large. There's exceptions, but by and large, so you can have a very positive impact on people by the choices you make, or negative one, I guess.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So there's a couple more biases I think are important to mention. There's bias due to primary and secondary outcomes. So the idea of differentiating primary from secondary outcomes. Are the findings based on the primary outcome? And so there's some debate about whether you can only have one primary outcome or whether you can have co-primary outcomes. But the primary outcomes are basically the outcomes for which the study is designed around and it's powered against. I believe, and I'm not a statistician, but I think that studies are really only useful if they have a primary outcome. You can have happy mistakes that you can create new studies out of, but a study really has one. When you're talking about HO, H1, I think there's only one primary outcome. And so, but there's lots of secondary outcomes that happen when you're doing studies, and they're often exploratory. So it's really important that when studies are being pre-registered, they state what the primary outcome is and what the secondary outcomes are. And
what is a co-primary? I mean, wouldn't anything beyond the primary be a secondary?
I think it would be. Anything beyond the primary would be secondary. And so when a study fails to meet its primary outcome, that would be deemed a null study, even if it meets secondary outcomes. So it's important to pay attention to the subtlety of that. And a good journal with a pre-registered study is going to make that very, very clear. It's going to make that abundantly clear. So it's important to understand that, because it gets to this next problem, which is the kind of multiple hypothesis testing problem. And so research should be hypothesis seeking or hypothesis testing, but it can only be hypothesis generating. And so you can use statistical tools to break things up and slice it and dice it and look at data in multiple ways, which is where statistics is like a beautiful language. It's kind of amazing. You can take many looks at data to see if you actually find something significant there. I mean, think about like the implications that has had in safety. Huge implications of safety. They can tell you, I mean, this is kind of the beauty of engineering and science and statistics, is they can tell you with 100% certainty exactly when it's going to fail, when something is going to break, when something's going to implode, when things are going to start to fall apart. They know that's why there's life cycles to airframes. I mean, they know exactly how many times you can pressurize and unpressurize a cabin before there's negative repercussions or negative consequences to that. So you can take many looks at data to see if you actually find something significant there. And you got to be careful, because the more you look, the more times you look at something, the more likely you are to find something that is indeed positive. And so in medicine, and I've been a victim of this, there's a very dangerous risk of, and this is why I just get so angry with the FAA that they put pilots through the ringer on a lot of this stuff. There is a risk of every time you do imaging, every time you do a study, there's something called incidental findings. Incidental findings are where, oh, well, we were looking for this, but we saw this. So now we've got to go on a exploratory path to figuring out what that is. And that can lead to unnecessary procedures. It can lead to people getting hurt and even losing their lives due to incidental findings. And often incidental findings lead to nothing. They go through all this testing and all this diagnosis, and they go, that's nothing.
Or at the very least, could end up prolonging their, the time that it takes to regain their medical license.
Yes, huge. And the FAA is saying, making people go through, cardiac, nuclear stress tests every year when they're getting a massive dose of radiation, just like, that's just, and you talk to cardiologists, they're like, that's just stupid. That doesn't even register why you would do that on a yearly basis. You'd put somebody through that on a yearly basis. And then, when you do the study, now guess what? Well, it looks like there's a little thing here. And then the FAA goes berserk. Oh, now we've got to do a cath study. Now we got to go up and do a catheterization. And, it's just, the point is you got to be careful. You got to be careful, because the more you look, the more you are going to find things. So here's a great example that again, my mentor, Peter Attia, what he talks about is flipping a coin. So you can flip a coin once. What's your chance of getting heads? If you flip a coin once?
50-50.
50-50. And if you get two chances to flip the coin, the probability that you're going to get heads is now 75%. If you get three chances, you're up to 87.5% chance that you're going to get at least one head. 10 times, you're basically at 100% likely that you're going to get heads. So if you're allowed to 10 looks, you've got to correct for that. And so there's something in statistics called a Bonferroni correction factor that does force you to do that. It forces you to divide the p-value by the n, where n is the number of times you've taken a look at the data that you're looking at. And therefore, it raises the bar for what is considered statistically significant, which is what p-values are. Let me do one more. Do you have any thought? Yeah.
I just, the fewer you do, though, isn't it also
it's less
a potential likelihood?
Very much. Yep.
Because now, could it have been just random?
Yes.
And the next 9 times you do it, you're going to find out you happen to get the one outlier that makes it look like it's correct, but it really wasn't. It was the anomaly. So there's got to be I think a happy balance, a medium.
Yes.
Where is there a
there is
historical?
Well, and it depends on the study, and it depends on what you're measuring. It depends on what's the N number. There's a lot of different metrics that go into that, which is why statistics, I mean, any scientific study that is worth their salt, they will have a PhD statistician that will interpret the results, because it's that complicated, and it requires all of these tools and all of this knowledge and computer models to be able to do this, to correct for some of these.
Because you would want it to be replicatable.
Well, and then that's the beautiful part about science is it validity and reliability? Is there repeatability? Which is why you want people to do the same experiment many, many times, because you're like, great, it's stable. We can show this over and over and over that it produces the same result. There's good reliability with that. Whereas if you do a study once and you go, okay, here's the significance, and then you try to replicate it and it doesn't show, and you're like, oh no, forget it. Just pay attention to the first one. Which is drug companies, which is like, it's crazy what they get away with.
Or they do them until they get
they'll keep doing it until they get the answer, and they go, see, it's publishable, we got it. Which is just like, it just kind of blows my mind.
To me, that's bad science.
I think it's bad science. I think it's reckless, but somebody's making money.
Because it's all profit driven.
Yeah.
Not results.
Yeah. Yep. Well, and that's why, when the company that's making the drug is also doing the study, there's a huge conflict of interest there. Huge conflict of interest. It should be illegal, but it's not. So, and that's Washington. So let's talk about confounding. So how well did the study control for confounding? This goes back to this, a good user bias, selection bias. Confounding occurs when a factor is associated with both the treatment and the outcome, and is not part of the causal pathway from exposure to the outcome. So an example would be, let's say people that consume coffee, let's go back to coffee, that are more prone to motor vehicle accidents. Let's just say that. So does the coffee consumption cause motor vehicle accidents? Do motor vehicle accidents cause coffee consumption? Maybe, but it's more likely that people who drink coffee are likely to be driving in their car during rush hour. Let's say in the morning, going to work. And most accidents occur, guess when? Rush hour, in morning, when people going to work. So does that mean, well, coffee causes motor vehicle accidents? So that's like, it's kind of a silly example, but
well, here's one. Think about, and I'm drawing a blank right now. That's horrible of me. I think it was American. It might have been Eastern, where they were down in Florida in the Everglades.
Eastern.
They had the blinking light,
yep.
And that in itself did not create a danger, but they were so focused on that they weren't watching what the autopilot was off, and that they ended up crashing. That in itself didn't create the unsafe environment.
Right. It's not the light. Yeah. The light was, and which, by the way, the light was fine. It was just burned out. And that's a lot of modern CRM has come from that.
Everybody focused on one thing to the to the detriment of everything else.
That's right. And there were other variables like captain's authority and a culture of not questioning, the higher ranking person on the flight deck, and which is a problem. And I think we're seeing this. It's circling back around because the experience levels are less, and people are less likely to question the captain, because they don't feel like they have the right to be questioning them, or they don't even have the experience to know to question them.
I think that's the big one.
I think it's a big deal.
The fact is that they don't know enough to know, and even though they think it might be, they're going, well, he or she must know more than I do. And so they'll err on the side of, I'll just be quiet. And
right.
Sometimes that's not the good thing to do.
So let me just button this up. So here's the thing. I was thinking about this, is what do I want you to take away from this? Here's what I want you to think about this. When you're looking at a study, you can ask yourself a series of basic questions. How large or small is it? If it's 5 people or it's 50,000 people, there's a difference. Is it randomized? Is it a randomized experiment? Meaning, are the participants randomly selected or not? That makes a difference. Is there a control group even? What's the kind of control? Is it placebo? Is it crossover? How appropriate is the control or the crossover groups? Is it blinded? Is it single blinded, meaning just the participants are blinded to whether they're getting the treatment or not? Are the experimenters blinded? They don't know who got the treatment and who didn't. That makes a difference. How long or short is the study? I mean, they talk about diet studies, which I understand studies are really expensive to conduct. They're not, there's funding that's involved, and you can't do a study for 50 years. But, when they're doing like, cold exposure studies, and they observe people for 2 weeks versus 3 months, I think that makes a difference in terms of how you interpret the results. How generalizable are the results? Are the participants kind of like everybody else? Can you generalize it, or is it just too specific? Single site or multi-site? How big is the association or effect? Is it clinically meaningful? Are there adverse events? Who funded the trial? Do the authors have any conflict of interest? I don't like it when authors sit on the board of the drug company. That's, and most research institutions forbid these researchers from doing that. It's a conflict of interest. And if you do have a conflict of interest, you got to state it. I have a conflict here. And is the study adequately powered? There's lots of things that go into power. I think for the layman, the biggest thing is how many participants did you have? N number. If it's underpowered, it means there's just not enough oomph. And part of that is you just didn't have enough participants, or you didn't wait long enough. You didn't hold out long enough to really get meaningful data. So that's what I wanted you to just learn a little bit about. What is good science? What is bad science? It's a complicated question. But to me, it's not about whether you're a Democrat or a Republican. It's not about whether you're rich or poor, or you're black or white. I just look at how is the experiments, what is the research question? Is there a hypothesis? Did they have enough participants? Did they look at confounding variables? Was there were some of these biases at play? So that's what I want you to look at when you're looking at a paper, or you read something in the newspaper that says eggs are bad. Go and look at the study that they're referencing. And it's very likely that the reporter only grabbed one snippet and decided to write a whole article out of it. That's probably likely. And if not, look at how the study is designed and see, like, okay, who funded it? Where was it done? How many participants? Were there confounding variables? Those kinds of things, I think, will allow you to be able to answer for yourself: is this good science, or is this hokey? Not such great science. It's on a continuum, though. It's not black or white. There's degrees.
And that is part 3 of 3.
Done.
Yeah, done.
Done.
Stick a
fork in it.
Stick a fork in that bad boy.
People are going to be like,
I tell you,
what in the hell did you guys just talk about?
Yeah, no kidding. It's like, oh my God. The guy going, okay, I better not ask about voodoo now.
Yeah, probably not.
Yeah. I thought I would ask a question about something that is obviously very near and dear to your heart, and just kind of, it's a little bit of a semi-plug, but it's also just kind of, how is the V1 project going? You now have 2 cohorts going, and very different dynamics, I think, is what you were saying, from one who's done stuff. And how are you feeling about it?
Super excited about it. I think we finally had the first all cohorts meeting where we brought a couple of the cohorts together, and I thought that was really interesting. One of the things that we've decided, and we haven't even written about it or put it on the website or anything, but one of the things that we used to offer was the mental skills for value-based living course, which was a 10-week course that pilots could take at LiftAffect, where we teach them psychological flexibility skills, some mental mental management skill building, and we do a lot of values work. How do you live according to your values, not just your goals, and how do you create psychological flexibility around that? And you've taken the class. I think it's a really powerful course that you can apply to not just your professional life, but your life in general. I think it teaches some really good skills, and
it was very good. Matter of fact, I want to retake it just because it's one of those things where there's so much there that you almost have to go back and go.
Yep.
There's multiple tools in each of those areas that we talked about. And, sometimes you only get to try one of them at a time, and you need to go back and go, okay, is there, let me see if another one gives me a better result. There's just so much there. It was almost, I can't say overwhelming, but there was just
there's a lot there. It scratches the surface, and it's repetition is the mother of mastery. As pilots, we all know that. And so, but one of the problems, and look, the reason I even created the course in the first place and offered it was so that I could continue to work on it. I mean, it keeps my head in that game on a consistent, and I've taught that course many, many times, and I get something out of it every time. Something changes, there's a level of depth that increases as I do it. So, but one of the problems that we've run into is that the bandwidth issue. We just don't have the time to do it. And we haven't been running classes lately because V1 has just been really taking up a lot of time, and we're really investing in that. The class will be offered again at some point, but we don't know when. And lots of people have contacted LiftAffect saying, "When can I take the class?" And I hate to say, I don't know. I'm not sure yet. It's hard to coordinate all that. When we brought the two cohorts together, what was kind of interesting is all of the first cohort has taken that course. That was a prerequisite. For that initial alpha cohort. And I don't mean alpha like alpha dog. It's just Alpha Bravo Charlie. That's how we name the cohorts. But the alpha cohort, everybody's had mental skills. Bravo cohort, which is the one that just started a month or two ago, that wasn't a requirement. And a few people have been in the mental skills class, many haven't. And when we brought the two cohorts together, it became very clear that there was a delineation and a difference between those that had the class and those that hadn't. Because it was coming up in the conversation. It was coming up in just some of the ways that we were approaching what we were talking about. And the feedback I generally got from the Bravo cohort was, shit, I really want that. I want that course. I want that information. So we got some feedback from the Alpha group. They kind of weighed in on it. We had some discussions around it. We workshopped it. And one thing we decided was that is now the mental skills that course is going to be taught in V1 upon initial arrival for every cohort that goes in there. So, and they're excited about it. And I think it's a good value, and that's kind of a new development. So that's kind of my takeaway of where V1 is at right now. We're recruiting for the Charlie cohort. So if anybody wants to participate, there's still some slots left in that. That will probably start maybe late summer, I think. We'll fill it certainly before then. But just in terms of scheduling, we'll get that started. But the mental skills is now going to be put in there. And if you're interested in the mental skills class, I strongly suggest you sign up for V1, because the first basically 4 months are going to be that nearly exact class is just now baked right into the curriculum.
I agree. It's definitely something that will help you, because otherwise you're kind of learning as you go, and you're not going to get the full impact of what V1 has to offer, because it references a lot and it leans on that. So in our case, it was a prerequisite, because when V1 started, it leaned on all those things. So in this case, you're going to kind of say you're getting a 2-for-1. Yep. You're going to actually get both of them together all at once. And they'll be seamless. You'll walk right from one, even though it's all called V1, you'll basically walk from the mental skills right into the
regular curriculum. V1. Yeah. What's your experience? You're in the Alpha cohort, Karl. How has it been? What's your kind of observations from being in it for, I guess we're at 5 months now, I think, right? We've been doing it for about 5 months.
I'm watching the group grow. I think there's a comfort level of, and it's amazing to watch and listen to people start using those tools and referencing those tools. There are just so many tools, and like I said, it's almost like you got to go back and revisit it. Literally, you go back and watch the web, all the recorded webinars, because that's part of what you get. You're able to look back at your previous times, and you can actually find things that you go, wow, I didn't get that the first time, or you know what, I'm going to try that. And that's why I say the same with the mental skills, same thing in V1. There's so many tools, and all this is to be able to become the best version of yourself.
Yep.
And we'll say it that way. It's to help you and to be better around others.
What do you feel?
Your job
How do you
is
feel
not to
about
fix others, but to fix to help yourself.
How's the community aspect? Because one of the goals that I set out with V1 was to build community, because pilots,
it was slow,
lack it.
But I think again, it was we were still trying to figure out what tools to use, and we've recently added a new tool into our group that you're starting to see. All of a sudden, you're starting to see interaction with the group members to a level that wasn't there before. So I think it's growing. And again, we're good or bad. I don't know, I should say good and bad. We're the trailblazers in this regards. So we're making mistakes, and we've learned from them, and the follow-on cohorts are going to reap the rewards of that.
From it. Yep.
So, but there's some things that, we were a little bit slow to take in, and we were looking at for different things and kind of going, is that really, you can draw erroneous conclusions based on what you're seeing and go, well, what's the cause? And some of it was sometimes it's just using the right tool to be able to sit there and communicate more effectively. And I think you're starting to see that. And I think it's going to continue to grow.
Yeah.
And I think you're going to see a huge difference in the following cohorts, because they're never going to know any different. They started it from ground from day one with it, whereas we had to kind of find our way to figure out what was the best way to do that. So it's and I think it's going to continue that way. There's going to be other things we haven't even thought of yet. And that's what makes this so neat, is because this is a growing learning experience where we all are benefiting from. So anybody that's out there that wants to better themselves, help themselves from mental skills. I can't say mental health, but it does affect your mental
benefits
health.
of it. Yep.
Yep. This is something very, very worthwhile, and something you should seriously consider. The time that you invest in it, you'll receive back. I don't want to put a number on it, but it's multifold return on it that will benefit you and enhance your life.
I agree.
It's just that simple.
That's a good plug, man. Look at that plug. Wow. Like professional advertisers. No, but this isn't for advertising. I mean, this is it's really worth your time. And this is brand new. If you want to do V1 project, you can email info at the V1, the number one, not ONE, but the V1 project.com. Info at the V1project.com. Let us know if you're interested. We will require a phone call with you to talk to you and just make sure that it's going to help you and that it's the right thing for you. It's not just anybody who wants to sign up is going to be able to do it. We got to be able to have a conversation and make sure that it's the right fit.
I want to say one last thing just before we finish is, if this wasn't worthwhile, I wouldn't do it. I've got so many other things that in my life that there is a commitment to this, as far as at least time and actually trying to practice all the things you've learned. If I didn't see the value in this, believe me, I wouldn't be doing it. There's just so much value here that my biggest regret is that this wasn't around 5 years ago. This would have helped me immensely, I think, to deal with issues that, arose that may never have affected me otherwise. So this wasn't a plug because I'm part of it. It's a plug because it actually has value, a lot of it. So with that said, unless there's anything else you want to throw in, as always, please share this with others. Give a thumbs up, give a positive review, give us a like. Podcast at LiftAffect.com. If you have any comments, critiques, questions you want to ask, we look at all of them. I don't know that we're going to do a 3-part series on everyone that's asked.
No.
But we take them serious, and we want to hear from you. With that, we thank you, we appreciate you, and we look forward to seeing you on our next podcast. Have a great day.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the LiftAffect podcast. If you want to dive deeper into this episode and every episode, go to our website, LiftAffect.com/podcast. If you're enjoying the show, we would love it if you'd follow us on Spotify and rate, review, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts. We really appreciate your support. You can find me on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, all with the ID Matthew McNeil. This show is brought to you by LiftAffect, a clinical mental health and consulting company that assists air carriers, corporate flight departments, pilot unions, and commercial pilots by providing comprehensive psychotherapy and mental skills coaching services to pilots with mental health and mental performance-related issues. Visit LiftAffect.com, that's LiftAffect.com, to book your free consultation. And finally, this podcast is for general informational purposes only. It does not constitute the practice of counseling, psychotherapy, medicine, or any other healthcare service, including the giving of medical advice. No therapeutic or provider-patient relationship is formed. The use of this information and any materials linked to this podcast is at the user's own risk. The content of this podcast is not intended to be a substitute for professional psychological advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Users should not disregard or delay in obtaining advice for any psychological or medical condition they have, and they should seek the assistance of their healthcare professionals for any such conditions. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time on the LiftAffect podcast.